Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihiyeh b'dvarei. Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, good morning to everybody. Thanks for joining us. This shir is sponsored by Mrs. Deborah Jacoby in honor of her beloved father, R Yaakov Ben Shlomo, blessed memory, and Hashem should have an aliyah in the schus of our learning together this morning. And we jump back into Torah Yites, V'siyata D'Shmaya, Torah 19, where we've learned about the three general categories of all of creation, the spiritual framework that underlies our reality, which is the Shalosh Klipas Hatmeis Legamri on the one hand, and Chashmal on the other hand, and Klipas Noiga in the middle, and how, in a certain sense, the Chashmal, the ultimate Kedusha, which correlates on the level of language to Lashon HaKodesh, is constructed through the sparks that come out of the Klipas Noiga, which, in that framework of language, is the Targum, which is the aspect of the Klipas Noiga in the middle, that we're able to utilize the sparks that are embedded in there to create the Lashon HaKodesh. Right, to contribute to the totality of what it means to live a life with the recognition of Kedusha and everything. And that's pshat, like we learned in the story of Adam and Chava's creation, Chava being the sort of embodiment of Malchus, which is the aspect of Dibor and Lashon HaKodesh, more specifically, like we had the pasuk Yom Yom Yabia Omer, right, where the days exchange information, right? There's an utterance, there's a communication of das, right, with Laila to Laila, and that's the aspect of Yechave is Chava. And this idea of Chava being created required the Tardema, the darkness that falls upon Adam Arishan, and Tardema, Gematria, Targum, right, that the Klipas Noiga is contributing to the formation of Chava. Because ultimately the Tardema, the Bechina of Targum, the Klipas Noiga could go one way or another. It can either be dragged down to the realm of the Klipas Hatmeis Legamri, or it can be elevated into the realm of the Chashmal, right? And that's the Bechina of what happens later on with the Eitz Hadas Toivara, where they could have just drawn up all the Kedusha by listening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and interacting with the Eitz Hadas Toivara al pi pekudav. And in that sense, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told them not to touch the tree, really not to touch it, but not to eat from the tree. And they could have listened to that, and instead directed their focus to the Eitz HaChayim, and in so doing, they could have elevated the concept of the tree. There are things in this world that are meant to partake of. There are things in this world that are meant not to partake of. When we don't partake of them, but we do so consciously, we elevated the Noiga, and they could have brought it back to the Eitz HaChayim. But instead they didn't. And they went into that place of Noiga, and unfortunately the Noiga then falls down into the Shalosh Klipas Hatmeis Legamri. And ultimately, like we learned yesterday, and this is the concept both of the aspect of Keri, that when a person is sleeping, the Bechina of Laila Lelaila Yechave, right? There's a Bechina of the nighttime that's correlated to Dibor, because Malchus Peh, Tar Shabal Peh Karin Allah, right? Chazal tell us, the Pasach Elio, in the introduction to the Tikkun Zohar, tells us that Tar Shabal Peh is connected to the Bechina of Malchus. Malchus is the mouth, right? Like we like to say on the level of the face, which already contains all the spheres, but if you sort of abstract it, more specifically, you have the eyes as the Yud of Yud Kevavke, that's the light of Chachma. The ears is the element of Bina. The nose is the element of the world of Yitzira, or the Vav of Yud Kevavke. And the mouth is Malchus / Asiya, right, / Nukva, the Zer Anpin, right? The mouth is that partsuf of the last Hey of Yud Kevavke. The mouth is always correlated with the Bechina of Malchus. HaKadosh Baruch Hu therefore creates the world with his mouth, Hutziva v'nivra'u, right? There's a tziva, there's a tzav of the king that goes ahead and contributes to the creation or creates the world. And so over here you have the aspect of Laila, right, where a person is in the nighttime, and the nighttime is correlated with speech, because Tar Shval Peh is nimshal to the nighttime, and that's the aspect of Zud Tar Shval Peh, right, Talmud Bavli, Shenimshal Alayla, that's comparable to night. And in that nighttime, one of two things is going to happen, right? Either a person's going to be able to cool off, right, the taiva, which is the fire inside that goes outside of the boundaries, with their own das, and with the bechina of shakai, right, with the bechina of reining in a person's natural desires. And in that sense, ani kel shakai, pray ureve, going back to Adam and Chava, who were told to only be with one another, right, and not that it should go out of the boundaries. And that's shakai, misha amadai lamai, die. That's the midah of shmir sabris. That's the shame for keeping things within steady boundaries. Or on the opposite, because it has to cool off one way or another, could be the opposite, right? Which is that the taiva burns itself out, so to speak. And the rachsara has to put it out in the end because there's no chashmal and there's no noiga, or there is a noiga, but it's dragged down into the shalosh klipos atmeis legamri. And in that sense, we get kari asher karcha baderech derech kein derech isha and mina efes. That's the bechina of derech of taivas niyav of that taiva. And that's what happens in the nighttime, and that's the bechina of the chaloim that can go one way or another. And Yosef HaTzadik, like we said, who's the Shomer Abris, who therefore has the Shleimus Lashon HaKodesh, he's the one who's able to interpret dreams and to be able to make Seder, right, in a world of Irbuv, in a world of Arva Chayshech Mishtamshim Be'Irbuvia, with the aspect of the Eitz Hadas, Taiva. And the last thing that we learned was the way in which on Erev Shabbos, the Klipas Noiga of the Sheishis Me'achol wants to rise up in, right, through the Klipas Noiga of Bein HaShemashos, Erev Shabbos, to be yonik from the Kedusha of Shabbos Kodesh, and the way to respond to that is by pouring down, right, the fire of the coals, which is the aspect of a hot shower. The water comes over the head and emerges and flows down the body, and a person should be mechaven that that's exactly what's happening. And we spoke also about this in the context of the Sheishas Alafim Shana, where we are in history, and different bechinas of the way in which we might be experiencing some of the Klipas Noigas, desperate, or the Shalosh Klipas Hatmeis Legamri, is apostrophe S, desperate attempts to rise up through the Klipas Noiga, which is being cleansed through the Hashkafa Sachaim of the Baal Shem Tov and those who followed him, and the Mikubalim, can try, right, to sort of get through, and we have to be very careful to take what needs to be taken and to leave what needs to be left. Okay, that was basically everything that we've learned, at least in the past year or two. Here we jump back in, says the Heilige Rebbe, Schusia Gerleinu Ois Vav. When a person elevates the positivity, the positive elements that are within the Targum, and thereby mashlim asalashon hakodesh, like we said, Chav is created from Adam through the Tardema, which is Gematria Targum. So that's mashlim. That's what makes a shleimus of the lashon hakodesh, shaboy nivra olam, with which the world was created. When a Jew emerges in this arena of this struggle to interact with the Klipas Noiga and to believe that there's a lukus there, right? To believe that mamish, we can extract the positive elements of Hashem's presence and to elevate them and to bring them out, that strengthens the letters that are in all of creation, where the presence, the felt presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu gets increased, gets stronger. And this is something akin to what the Mesilas Yesharim writes, I think, in the very first parak, where the tzaddik says that if a person engages with one food in a way of Kedusha, this elevates all the foods, right? Like a person has one slice of pizza and they do so with consciousness, all the pizzas in the whole world just had an aliyah, right? And then either Ramchal, again, it was trying to pass Kabbalistic ideas through under the guise of Musar, right? Mesilas Yesharim is really a Kabbalah sefer, and there's a lot of different sentiments in there that are really straight from the world of Kabbalah, right? In the first parak of Mesilas Yesharim, that idea of aliyas nitzaitzos, that's a pneumius idea, right? But it finds itself in through the Ramchal's, editorial process, through the form of Mesilas Yesharim in an amazing way. But that's what the Mesilas Yesharim writes, and that's what Rabbi Nachman echoes here. The whole world has an aliyah. It actually shifts the nature of the world because it contributes to the Lashon HaKodesh. That's the result of the hashlama of the targum of the bechina of klipas noiga. Ki kol davar, because every single thing in the world yesh by kamet surifei oisia shaboy nivra zeh davar. It has many different permutations that all combine to create as they pass through, whatever it is that allows code to become front-end reality, right, which is, we know, is the sphere of Malchus, right? So as these spiritual energies pass through to become a cup of coffee, right, or a cup of tea, there are many, many different letters that need to converge in precisely the right code, just like Mamish code. That's why Kadosh Baruch Hu is giving us a great mashal now as we come to the end of time with regard to code and apps and virtual reality. It's all this. It's all this. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, meaning technology, and the technological revolution is mirroring the Pnimius revolution, because it's giving us an ability to fortify what this might actually be. If you can imagine a fully VR, bodysuit, where you feel all the sensations, that's exactly what we are living in. We're living in a VR. We're just living in a super advanced VR, but we are souls, just like the first-person player, right, who's wearing, the VR goggles, is not actually in the game, but it feels like it. And that's exactly and when that clicks for all of humanity, everything will be different, because we'll know how to engage with this place without taking it too seriously, but by understanding the mission, which is exactly the point of going into any VR space, presumably, not just to hang out. There's a mission, there's a fight, there's a war, there's a, I don't even know what these things are, honestly. What's a game, with what's that game with terrible graphics that I can understand why people play? Minecraft. It's 2025. We developed 200 years. Anyway, I don't know. I don't understand these things. But there's presumably, I don't know. But presumably there's some objective, right? That's why you're in the thing. There's something to build. There's something to gain. There's something to do. There's something to catch. There's whatever it is, right? This is exactly the way it is in this world. The whole thing is VR. And so whatever it is that allows the code to pass through and become front-end reality, we understand that these are letters of the Aleph Beis, which are each different forms of spiritual energy, and are also numbers, by the way. So it really is a string of numerical code. It's an incredible thing. The Aleph Beis is not, we think, and I probably mentioned this in the past, B'Tzalel, in building the Mishkan, which the Zohar Kodesh says the Mishkan was a microcosm of the entire world, needed to know all the letters with which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. But maybe it's the numbers. Maybe it's all math, right? Maybe because the Aleph Beis could go either way. It's both numbers and letters. It's letters and numbers. Maybe he knew the string of code with which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, the fractal, geometry, and which is exactly what it is. That ultimately figures out a way to become reality through some mysterious process. Wild thing. Says the Tzaddik, every single thing in the world is created out of these letters and kamatzi rufei oisius, many, many different permutations, each letter of which contributes some additional data. When it all comes together, it becomes this cup, and the water is water. Through the completion of Lashon HaKodesh, right, which is, again, the spiritual vessels of all of reality to communicate Kedusha, transcendence, and that becomes Shalom through Targum. All of the letters in every single thing have a proliferation of spiritual energy, and they grow and they enlarge. And that's pshat in the pasuk in Bamidbar, va'ata yigdan hakoyach adni kasher dibarta lemar. Right, Moshe Rabbeinu is davening that Hashem should have mercy on Klal Yisrael after the Egel, and he says, Ribbono Shel Olam yigdan hakoyach adni. Let your koyach proliferate kasher dibarta lemar, as you yourself have said that you would have mercy on these people, you would watch over these people, you would guard them, you would maintain them, you would keep them. Says the Rebbe, the word Lamar, not in this context, but in a context relating to Adam and Chava, Lamar da Gilei Arayis. In that context, the word Lamar is a reference to Gilei Arayis, which is Haida B'chinas Hamadur Shel Shavim Koi Chavim Hanal, which is the aspect of the torch of the 70 sparks, the 70 stars, right? Which we said is the nations, the Lashonos of the nations of the world, which is nullified through the speech of Lashon HaKodesh. And that's pshat in the pasuk. Kasher dibarta lemar, Hanukafia dibur shalosh HaKodesh, which is dibarta lemar, right? Which is a dibur that's able, lashon neifel lashon, that's able to counteract the lemar, which is Gilei Arayis. Kasher dibarta lemar, when your lashon, meaning the lashon HaKodesh, is able to counteract and contrast and battle with the lemar, which Chazal Darshan is a reference to Gilei Arayis. So which through that is emerging the Isser of Gili Arayis and the Bechina of Shem Shakai and the counteraction of Tavas Niyav. So then go back to the beginning of the pasuk. Kemoikein Yigdal na Koyach Adni. What's Adni? Adni is the shame of Malchus. Right? Like we say before Shemana Esrei, Aleph Daled Nun Yud Sifasai Tiftach. That should open our mouths. The Adanim of the Mishkan is the shame Adni. Right? And the Adanim, the sockets on the bottom, which is the aspect of Malchus, which receives the Krushim, right, which is the Bechina of Kutchabrichu or Tiferes, right? The Vav of Yud Kevav Ke that comes down into the final Hey, and that's why they were called Adanim, because it's the shame Adni. So Yigdan no Koyach Adni Ka'asher Dibarta Lemor. When the Dibor of Lashon HaKodesh is able to counteract Lemor, which is Gili Arayis, you know what happens then? Yigdan no Koyach Adni. Meaning the Koyach of the aspect of Adanim, which is the Peh, which is the speech of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the receptacles for spiritual energy, a Lashon that could either be Lashon Chol, right, or it can be Lashon Kodesh, because it's transmitting Kedusha. Then Yigdan no Koyach Adni. All the letters scattered throughout the world are going to increase in their strength and potency as a result of Kasher Dibarta Lemor. V'zeu Kasher Dibarta Lemor. Hana kefiyat dibur shel Lashon HaKodesh, in accordance with the words of Lashon HaKodesh, shal yodei neser arayis v'nisbatel tavas niyav, that through that the arayis is nisbatel, is nesar v'nisbatel tavas niyav kanal kamoikin yigdana koyach adni. To the extent that a person is utilizing noiga in a proper way to elevate their own lives, Mamela their Lashon HaKodesh is going to get that much deeper. By the way, in this that we split Targum and Lashon HaKodesh in the context of Chashmal, right? Well, in Klipas Noiga, to use the order, and Chashmal. So then, as applied to our own lives, if Klipas Noiga is in the aspect of B'chol Drachecha Da'eu, right, which we said is the aspect of Chol, but which could also have Kedusha in it, so business dealings and eating and drinking and sleeping and, going on holiday and having chill time and every stam, doing groceries, whatever it is that a person needs to do in life that isn't overtly Kodesh, in as much as a person is able to live there with consciousness, according to the formula here, your tefillah is going to get stronger. Right, meaning that the aspect of Kedusha, the learning is going to be stronger. Shabbos is going to be more meaningful. Yamim Tovim are going to be more meaningful, because it turns out that you cannot have one in Shlemos without the other. So if a person thinks that I'm going to have Kedusha in the realm of Kedusha Arasov, and then I'm going to forget about Hashem when I leave the Beis Medrash Beis Knesses, not only will my general life suffer from the standpoint of spiritual connection, but my overt relationship with Kedusha is not B'Shleimus, because I don't have a connection to Hashem that is reflective of the authentic reality of that which HaKadosh Baruch Hu desires when He tells us in the premise to Shulchan Aruch, Shivisi Hashem L'negdi, summit, always. So the way that the Rebbe is setting this up is incredible. The more that a person finds Hashem outside of the Beis Medrash, the more a person is going to be able to connect to Hashem in the Beis Medrash. The more a person finds HaKadosh Baruch Hu throughout life outside of the Beis Knesses, they come into davening, and there's a natural relationship, because it's not like you're not picking up where you left off. You never left off. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with us every minute when we're in the shul, when we walk out of the shul, and that's a kesher shel kayama. That's a bond that's real. I like to say, when a person realizes that the God that they speak to in Hispodidus, which bless us always should have Hispodidus, is the same Hashem in Mincha, like it's not a fundamental shift, then everything changes. Then your Mincha changes. So all of a sudden, yeah, it's the same words that you've been saying since you're a kid, but it's reflective of the relationship that you've invested in to build on your own. Then it's just a kli. And it's a kli for the very, very same energy. You just pick up where you leave off. And a person who's in Hispodidus the whole day, right, even though it's important also to take time when you're not driving, your phone is off or whatever it is, but a person is the whole day living with Hashem. The Bechina of David HaMelech, who was Mamash Lashon HaKodesh, David HaMelech is the Bechina of Malchus, right? He's the Bechina of Tefillah. And so what does he say? He doesn't say, I pray. Ani mitpalel. What does he say? Va'ani tefillah. I am a prayer. That David's whole life is a prayer. That David, and this is what a yid should be. That it's not pshat, Judaism is a part of my life and it's part of my identity. There's nothing, it is absolutely existentially definitive. It is why we're here in the first place. Not that I'm here and therefore I'm also an Orthodox Jew. The only reason that this neshama is in the VR reality of the guf, what would you just call it, a goof, but it's really a hyper sophisticated VR experience, is only for this, is that I should have the wisdom not to get lost in the distraction, but to keep conscious of connection to my source. That's the whole game. That's the game. Yeah.
You mentioned Shivisi Hashem and Egdisamid, but again reminds me, like yesterday, of the first Likutei Halachas, which is all about waking up from Shema, from Dardema, which is literally our topic. And also, I wanted to know, does this tie into Torah, like a Torah Nuvav, that we say, Afilu B'Hastar Shabbasoich Hastar, that everything is Melubash Hashem Yisbara.
Mamish.
Everything's Oisek, but Torah. Everything's called Torah.
Everything is Torah. Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. The same idea. There's Torah in everything. There are letters in everything. There's meaning in everything. I mean, it also ties very much into Torah Aleph, right? And it ties very much into Torah Yud Zayin, right? Finding the Elokus in everything. That's what the tzaddik does. That's the job. The chiddush here is that will not only bolster our spiritual connection in Chol, but that it and only it will contribute to the Shleimus Lashon HaKodesh, which is a pella. Mamash a pella. Okay. To this extent that a person is able to live with constant attachment to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and thereby overcome the aspect of Tavas Niyav, that's going to increase the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu throughout creation, and specifically in the spiritual experience. And I think just another aspect of this, are millions of aspects, but another aspect is that part of the issue of the reason, I was just speaking yesterday to a therapist locally, and we were speaking about this topic, part of the reason that people struggle in this area, and my friend Rabbi Yaakov Klein wrote a whole book on the topic called Attached, is there's attachment theory, which enables people to understand that really all trauma and all maladaptation comes as a result of relationships that aren't healthy from a formative age. And it all traces back, to a person's issues with their parents and other caretakers, right? Who the relationship wasn't the way a relationship is supposed to be, in a healthy way of mashpia mekabel, with ava and connection and not manipulation and not sort of like narcissistic parenting, right? Where the children are extension of the parents, for like nachas making machines, as opposed to real love and real space that a person holds for their children, etc., etc., etc. If there are attachment issues, so that can lead later on to taivas niyah, which, seen through the compassionate lens of Torah Yud Ches, is not like, oh, this person's a Baal Taiva. This person is a healthy Jewish soul who's looking for connection, who's looking for love, who's looking for that which they really should have had and don't have, and now they're looking for it in all the wrong places, right? It's an attachment issue. Memela, says the Rebbe over here, if a person can work on the ultimate attachment with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a real way, that it isn't just a connection that sometimes, but like we're describing, it is total. It's Shivisi Hashem L'Negdisama the whole time. Then it's able to resolve a certain lack that Memela, he's using the terminology of Lashon HaKodesh, and he built a whole code out of it. But Memela, in a very, very, let's say, through a psychological lens, it's able to compensate, and not just compensate, it's able to be mashlim legamre, and in that sense, he says, let's just see it again. In as much as a person's building up Lashon HaKodesh through connection to the Targum, which is Klipas Noiga, so that I live with HaKadosh Baruch Hu not just in the shul and the Beis Medrash, but all the time. That attachment, right, will be able to heal the attachment wounds that a person didn't get ben adam l'chavera, they now get ben adam l'makam, and that's also able to contribute to the lessening of the intensity of this taiva. Kain is gadolus arkayach Hashem shema'isa bereisha shema oisiyais sheyesh b'chol davar v'davar shaba'olam k'nizkel el Zayin. U'mishi yachal hisayir hisnaitzutz ha'oisiyais sheb'chol ma'isa bereisha sheyesh b'chol davar. A person who is capable of awakening the hisnoitatus, that flickering spark of the ICS of the Hebrew letters that are scattered throughout creation, that are embedded within each and everything. as achilasai ushasiyasai, then his eating and drinking, v'chol tanugav, and all of his pleasures, einai ela mehisnoititus ha'oisya sheba'achila ushasiya, actually is experienced not as an experience of pleasure resulting from the thing, from the physical thing, but the recognition that the physical thing, again, just like the body, is just a delivery mechanism for the soul. That is a big VR set. So that means in this VR world, everything that we interact with is not actually the thing, right? It is reflective of the thing. What is the thing? The spirituality in it. That's what the Arizal says based on the pasuk, "Loi ala lechem levada yichya adam." A person doesn't live through bread. There's nothing in bread. Bread is dead. There's nothing in bread. Kehal kol moitzi pi Hashem yichya adam. I don't even know if Rabbi Nachman brings that pasuk. It's obvious pasuk to bring in this context. I don't think he does. Kehal kol moitzi pi Hashem yichya adam. A person is living off of the letters, which means they're living off of the elokus in this thing. That's what gives us pleasure. It's the connection to the spiritual energy within each and everything that we experience. There's godliness within this water. That's why it became water. Because when the code of chesed, together with whatever other elements were necessary to create this particular kind of water, right? I'm sure it's not just, general, like the code, chesed. It's a lot of different elements. When that passes through the VR world, it becomes this liquid that I could hold in my VR hand, And then my soul can enjoy this water by connecting to the soul of the water. And then a person lives in neshama. A person lives in a world of neshama where, because they don't take their body seriously, right? Meaning from the standpoint of their identity, they identify with their neshama, they're then able to identify with the neshama of all of reality. And what they see is not just the guf, they're connecting to the oisiyas that are within each and everything. This is the aspect of the pasuk in Rus. They ate and they drank, vayitav libay, and his heart was happy. Says the Rebbe, what's vayitav libay? There are 32 times that the name Elokim shows up in the creation narrative. That's Lamed Beis. Lamed Beis Nesivas Chachma. Sheyesh b'chol davar. Vayomer Elikim, Vayar Elikim, and so on and so forth. Elikim. Throughout the creation narrative, there are 32 shemas of Elikim that are scattered throughout creation. Or we should say that creation is founded upon. And these are the letters that are in everything. So they ate and they drank. Vayitav libay. Libay is the Lamed Beis Shabai. Ein taiv ar. And there's no goodness, vayitav, right? There's no goodness but light. Any pleasure that a person has is ar. It's the ar of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Without that, everything is dead and lifeless, like gamri, and tasteless and rotten. There's nothing. Anything positive comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light. As it says, Vayar Elikim es ha'ar kitayv. So v'zeh vayoichal vayesh, tzadikim eat and drink, vayitav, and thereby they connect to the ar, that's Vayar Elikim es ha'ar kitayv, vayitav, and libay. Shais achilasu yishtiyasai me'aras v'esnoititus ha'oishius, oisiyas shalamed beis Elikim shebesudas ha'shalich. Then when he's eating, he's cognizant of the spirituality here, right? And he remains conscious, and it's very difficult to do, right? We have the chabura on eating. It's difficult to do in eating because eating, in a certain sense, would appear to fortify the body. It would appear to be an extraordinarily physically oriented experience because the whole thing is that it's maintaining the koyach of the body. But that itself is a warped hashkafa on it. Why? Because that's not what eating is actually doing. Eating, as the Nefesh HaChaim makes clear in Shar Beis, doesn't strengthen the body. The body is nothing. The body doesn't get strengthened or weakened. There's no sensation in the body alone. The body is a corpse. It always was, it always is, and it always will be. The body's dead. The body's a kli. The neshama in the body doesn't either need food, right, to be strengthened, because the neshama is a chelik l'kamimal, doesn't need anything. What then does eating accomplish? As the Nefesh HaChaim, eating forges a bond between soul and body. Doesn't make the body stronger, it doesn't make the soul stronger. It takes the soul, which is already strong, and it binds it together with the body, which is fundamentally weak, And thereby the soul is able to infuse the body. Right? So when a person understands that this is what eating does, it becomes a little bit easier. Because it isn't simply that a person's eating to strengthen the body. It's not about the body. It's about this soul bond. And therefore, when a person eats, and we're going to learn this in Torah Samach Beis and other places, when a person eats in a way of Kedusha, that's able to trigger because what eating is it is a bond fortifier, right, between spiritual and physical. Memela, there's no greater opportunity for spiritual connection than when a person eats, because Beklalius, what they're doing, Beklalius, what they could be doing, they're sending it, and let's start again. We keep on losing those few minutes.
It's also the
That's okay. So what a person does, right, is in that experience they are literally causing for the fortification of the bonding of the ultimate soul, which is the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and the ultimate body, which is all of reality. And that's why everything hinges on eating, but it depends how we approach eating. So when a person interacts with food and drink with the consciousness of the spiritual reality, identifying themselves as a soul and identifying with the soul of the food, so then their hana is not from the food. So then that tzaddik won't praise the food, because it's not the food. The food is not alive. The food has no pleasure. And there's no hisnotatus of R from the food itself. If there's any pleasure that a person derives from the food, is from the spirituality in the food. And it sounds like a very lofty idea, but it's really not. Like, if you think of it, it's really the case that this body is nothing without the soul. And that's the truth for every other strata of reality and everything else that we experience. Food may be first and foremost paramount. The challah that comes out of the oven is not, it doesn't smell good, and it doesn't taste good. The challah is dead. Challah is a guf. You know who else was called challah? Right? Adam, right? That Chava, part of the reason that she has the mitzvah of challah, she ruins the challah of the world, right? Because the body is challah, but the body is afar min adama. Kadosh Baruch Hu is baking challah a little bit. It's dead though. It happens to be that in the process of taking flour, right, which is already body and soul, and water, which is already body and soul, mixing it together and putting it in the oven, will produce the illusion, right, of now we created this thing called challah. But it's really the R within water and the R within flour, when mixed together and channeling down different code of a process that's called baking, then it comes out of the oven and it smells gewalt, but it's not the challah. There's a certain degree of elokus that's now brought into the world in a new form, that's where the smell comes from, that's where the taste comes from. That's absolutely unique, because it's a different string of code than, say, a person baking an apple cake. It's a different code. It's all code. And a person wakes up to this eventually. And the only way that a person could ever wake up to this is deep, deep, deep immersion in these Torahs. Deep immersion. Because slowly but surely our brains begin to rewire and begin to reorient. And a person starts to see the world in a completely different way. Legamre. And everything changes. And a person becomes spiritual. A person becomes spiritually oriented. Oriented toward the spirit as opposed toward the body. So this is what's being described over here. Vayoicha, vayesht, vayitav. They enjoyed the R. Ein toiv ala R, vayar elokim es ar ki toiv. Libai, where they connected to the Lamed Beis Elokim that are scattered throughout creation. Elokim is also a lashon of Malchus, even though Aleph Daled Nun Yud is the sphere of Malchus. Elokim is also, as the pasuk says, Elokim Malki Mikedem. Right? So the word Elokim could be associated either with Gevura or with Bina, but also with Malchus. Elokim Malki Mikedem. They found the Lamed Beis Elokim scattered throughout creation, which was manifest within Shebesu'udas Sha'oichal, which was in the Su'uda that they had eaten. V'zeh Vayitav Libai. And that's what it means, that their heart, Vayitav Libai, and Chazal Darshan the Zohar Kodesh and the Medrash Rabbah, Birchas HaMazon. This was Birchas Hamazon. What does this mean? That the tzaddik's eating and drinking is from the hisnoitzus ha'oisius. It's from the glittering and the glimmering letters that are within that eating and drinking. Shezabachinas birchas hamazon. This is what it means, the birchas hamazon. Because what's birchas hamazon? Ki hamazon is barech. It doesn't just mean birchas hamazon that they bench. They did birkat hamazon. It means that the mazon was misbarech. Barech from lashon of bracha, brecha, right? The flow and the magnification of energy from the beis to the chaf to the reish, right? Kiyadua, right? As it's a word. I think you were onto that, right, Edgar? Right? That the word increases, like the Maral tells us. That's what bracha means. Milashon brecha. It's a reservoir, right, where the water flows out and it progressively grows larger and wider and more and more and more and more. Because of the way that they ate, that it was a v'china of v'yochel v'yesh v'yitav libai. Say Chazal, the Chazal Darshan, you know what was present in that experience? Birchas hamazon. That was food. That wasn't just food. That was an interaction with the infinite. They immersed themselves in the energies of spirituality within the food that became the taste and became this, that the food had the capacity to bind their soul with their body, thereby giving them physical strength. Ki hamazon is barech ayidei shleimus lashon hakodesh, because everything was increased and was blessed via their interaction with the spiritual letters latent within the food that they engaged with. Because they awoke. They woke up. They were very woke, as were the sparks of holiness in the mamish, like the wokest. Right. So al yidishim, I don't know how to say this, but they woke up umeirin, and they inspired and they activated as the letters that are within everything. For a Jew, this is where we get our holiness. When did they teach us this in school exactly? When did they teach us anything in school that mattered on this level? Like, it's a totally different thing. It's legamri different. It's like, wow, there's a theory of food and drink. There's a theory of pleasure. And by the way, I think for teenagers, they would really relate to this because they know VR better than anybody. Way better than me. I never put on a VR, so maybe once in my life, you know. But the teenagers that are immersed in this reality in one way or another, you see what's happening here? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving the younger generation better mishalim, meaning better kalim, better frameworks to be able to understand Kabbalah than the older generation. This is mamish the giloi of a nivu b'neichev u'meneseichem u'bachurim yachsu chesyonos, whatever the pasuk says, and the elders will see dreams. And the Malbim says over there, which I've said over in the past, it's a shock of a Malbim, that as we come closer to Mashiach, the older generations that are more distant from the time of Mashiach, they'll only see dreams. The Bachurim, which are closer but not quite in the Yemais HaMashiach, they'll see Chazionos, which are stronger levels of Nevuah, and the children will have Nevuah. The children says, V'nivu b'neichem u'b'neiseichem. As it relates to Amunah, the kids know better, not the adults. The adults are older, they're connected more to Gullus. And it goes this way as we get closer and closer to Mashiach. It's the youth who have it more than the adults. And I think that this is part of why technology is so more readily adaptable in the youth than the adults, even though you can explain it on a pragmatic level, is that they're not like, the adults are used to the way things were, and the kids are much more, this is their generation. But on a deeper level, if you realize that the Chafetz Chaim already said when the creation of technology was beginning, that all technology in the world is simply to give us mishalim. Back then, if you remember the Chafetz Chaim's mashal, for example, the telephone, right? So he says that's the b'chin of oizen shemas, right? The cameras, the b'chin of ayin raya, right? Because how else could you have ever imagined that a person cannot be in a place and still see what happened in that place? That's the inyan of a camera. How could you think that something is not in a certain place, hearing what's somewhere far away? That's the b'chin of oizen shemas. That means in Gullus, throughout the Sheishas Alafim Shana, really until Plaga Mincha, which is like, or Chatzos on Erev Shabbos, which is where we're at, all the Mishalim were reflecting Nigla Satire. So the Mishalim that they had were good Mishalim for Nigla. Right? In Nigla, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Mashkiach from above, right? And we say Hashkifa Mima'in Kadcha Min Hashemayim, and up there, Da Malamala Memcha, that in Lamala there's a Bechina of Ayin Raya, Oizen Shema, says the Chafetz Chaim, beautiful. Now that's why we have cameras and what's it called? It's very cute for Gullus. But what's going on now? with virtual reality, with AI, with algorithms, with it's a whole, what's happening? We're moving into a realm of pnimis. It's like I hinted to it before, I'm just fleshing it out. Technology is just like psychology. It's all one thing. It's all one R that's being revealed into the world, and Mamela, it's reflecting itself in all the different relative and relevant aspects of existence. Technology, not any less than any other aspects, if anything, much more. And so if we could develop a way of being able to use the Mishalim and to be able then to bring it to our children and to help them understand the true nature of reality, I don't think there's ever been a dar that's more capable of integrating these truths than in previous generations. They had to break, because they didn't have code, they didn't know front end, back end, they didn't have apps, they didn't know, can you imagine, they didn't have the Mishalim. That's why Kabbalah was so difficult back then, because it was so abstract. How are you going to understand this? Today, it's in our pockets. Everything we're talking about is in the phone, because that's exactly how the phone works. That's exactly how code works. That's exactly, if a person knows a little bit in the realm of like physics, right, and quantum mechanics, that's exactly how science is revealing the true nature of the physical reality to be. And then it's just one step over to see, and that's the spiritual dynamic as well. And in fact, this is not, and this is what we speak about a lot, it's not a mushal for the physical. The physical is this way because the spiritual is that way. Because all of it is the code of the code. And so the spiritual reality ends up suffusing itself, that from the physical we're able to really understand the way that the spiritual dynamic works. And that's why the physical dynamic works the way it does, because that's how the spiritual dynamic worked all along. Unbelievable. Okay. So this is what he says. We did this, right? Okay, now here, this is Reb Nosson sweetens it a little bit, but the Rebbe says something that could be very discouraging, because he says v'chol chacham pashat. He says every basic chacham yachal leida oisiya shabay nivra davar azeh sha'eichal. The Rebbe says it's not a big madrega. You don't have to be even a big Kabbalist. Okay, Reb Nosson says no. Reb Nosson says you have to be a big chacham. And he puts in parentheses here, Pirish Shehu Chacham Lavan Afal Pishein Tzaddik. Obviously, we're talking about a big makobel, but it doesn't necessarily mean that a person has to be a tzaddik, because it's a science, right? That's where Rabbi Nosson came to Rabbi Nachman, and he asked him, Sichos Ran, is it possible for a person to understand Kabbalah even without the requisite kedusha? And some Mekubalim will tell you, no, it's impossible. The Rebbe's like, totally. He's like, it's a science. It's a wisdom like all other. You understand? Meaning it could be understood. There's a logic. There's text. A person could read. And you can understand the soul of it and the ability to really, turn it on, right, and utilize it in one's life. That requires kedusha. Otherwise, what are we doing, right? It just remains academia. But of course, a person could become a chacham and chachmas of Kabbalah. We've had great scholars, part of the Jewish nation, who didn't believe it at all, but they were great mekubalim. And not only that, a lot of the academic work that they did, people won't say this and tell you this, but the mekubalim used. Because there's a certain bikusha emes that wasn't necessarily extant, among the more religious, which are less rigorous from an academic standpoint. That means nuscha'os, and what's valid, and the different ishtalshalos of different influences that are traced through. And as much as a mekubal, cares about these things, he'll go to the Israeli library and look up, the Sholom's books and whatever it is, and he's able to learn from that. Because a chacham can know this, even if he's not a tzaddik. Says the Rebbe, if a person's a chacham, he will be able to understand the spiritual energies that are latent within whatever he's eating. Because a person who understands the spiritual source for the concept of sweetness or bitterness, sharpness or saltiness, because he understands that one is reflective of softness, the bechina, right, masikus, and let's say masikus here, and one is the aspect of that which is sharp and hard. Zem magdal, zem maktin. One is an aspect that it expands, that enlarges the taste, and one is a very sharp, very particularized taste. Zem mechabitz, zem marchiv. The same idea. One contracts and one expands. And he also knows the secret of the splitting up of the Hebrew letters among all the different spheres, which are split among the three imos, right? Which is really the bechina of amash, aleph, mem, shin, which are seen as the three fundamental pillars upon which the whole aleph base stands, v'sheva kfulais, and then the 7 letters that have kfulais, right? So a dalet without a mapik, right? And a dalet with a mapik, and a beis without, right? Which are beged kapiris, right? Beis, gimel, dalet, chaf, pei, reish, taf. Ushnei masar pshutais, and then the 12 other letters. The idea, and he understands how all of these different letters correlate to one of the spheres, and he also knows the secret, and he really understands the wisdom of the sphere. This is where the concept of softness comes from. This is where hardness comes from. He understands this code, because it is a code. As when a person like that eats something, and does so consciously, or he sees something, he sees colors, it's as simple as it is. He knows the letters that are in this thing. Because he knows that Mayim comes from the sphere of Chesed, and the sphere of Chesed is associated with the letter X, right? And through that, he's bonding himself with the ice. And that's what he tastes. That's what he experiences. Every single thing has a distinct appearance, like we learned in Torah Yud Zayin, has a distinct taste, has a distinct smell. And it's all because of the code of Lashon HaKodesh. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu was shokel, HaKadosh Baruch Hu weighed out exactly what was necessary for this thing. This aspect of code is going to go and create this. And this amount of letters with this unique code of letters or numbers creates this. And this is the aspect of all the different letters of the Torah, some words of which have extra letters. Eidos be Haisef Shemai, there's an extra hey. Some are Ma'iris Chaser Vav, right? Some have a Chaser, and many other examples. Sha'kol Fi HaMishkal. Everything had to be weighed out exactly. Shegarin and Ma'asifun Fi HaMishkal. Some we take away, some we add. All in accordance with the Mishkal, which is the maskala that we began with in the beginning of the Torah, right? Everything needs to be with a balance. Sometimes there needed to be less, sometimes there needs to be more, all in accordance with what the HaKadosh Baruch Hu intends to bring out. And by the way, this is what I mentioned, that there are Torahs in Likutei Moharan, I mentioned, where all of a sudden, in the middle of there's one Torah where the sentence doesn't finish. Rabbi Nassan says that lefi the mishkal of the tikkun and the taste, because the Torahs do taste very delicious, and the taste that Rabbi Nachman was trying to bring out, there was too many letters. It wasn't. So you have to chap what we're learning here. You have to understand every single letter is b'mechuvan. We can't fathom the wisdom of this person. We can't fathom it. We can't fathom the level of this person's neshama, mamish. Because this is what Hashem did with the Torah. This is what Rabbi Nachman Abdul did. This is what he did with his sefer. This that this is how many letters, how many words there should be. And this is how this thing should be created, with this amount of letters and these amount of nekudas. It should have this taste, and it should have this smell, and it should have this appearance. Go a little weiter. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided, okay, these letters, these nekudas, and that created through the code something else. So that the code should create a brand new functionality on the website. It should be something else, a different element, right? That was created with this new code. And this is the way it is with everything. Says the Rebbe, a person who is just a chacham, meaning he is not a tzaddik, you could learn this. Not only could you learn this, we must learn this. To be a Jew is to be a mystic. Every Jew must learn this. This is basics. Shivisi Hashem l'negdi sama, that we should be able to live in alignment with the spirituality that's within everything. B'chol drachecha da'eu. Sheyeda oisi yeshish b'chol davar kanal, that we can live with this. Aval sheyargish v'yisaneg rak mi'atzur v'yisiyas. So to know it intellectually is one thing, says the Rebbe, and that's true. You could be a chacham and know it. But to actually have that the tainuk should be from the interaction with divinity, that's not a matter of knowing it. That's a matter of mamish believing it. That's a matter of living with it. That's a person who literally is not a spectator on the field watching it from a detached academic, standpoint. This is a person who mamish is living it, absorbed in it. And then when that person interacts and engages with the godliness and everything, which seen through the lens of the Baal Shem Tov is the relationship between Ani L'Doidi V'Doidi Li in that thing, that it's the love in that thing, that's Ava and Yira the Dechilu Urachimu, about an interaction and a contact with the divine that's in this cup of coffee. And it's a direct connection with Hashem, no less than in Tefillah. Because in Tefillah we talk to Hashem, and in my coffee, I know the Kutzker says in Torah, I'm saying in coffee Hashem talks to me. I happen not to drink coffee, but it's something else that a person eats. This is HaKadosh Baruch Hu talking to them. There are letters there. That a person who mamish lives like that, that's able to bring about a proliferation of the Lashon HaKodesh shel kol davar, right? Va'ata yigdal no koyach adni kasher dibarta lemar, and the koyach adni is yigdal, is increased. Yehei shmei rabba mevarach la'olam le'ol me'almaya, right? The hey Shmei, right? Shem Yudke, the Shmei, the Shem Hey is Rabbah, is able to be increased. And all of reality becomes objectively holier. All of reality becomes a greater receptacle to communicate the transcendent element of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Creator. Vayitav ein ar elat, right? To ein toiv ala ar. And we're drawing on the 32 scattered shemas of Elokim, which is the Malchus, which are embedded within all of creation. Kadosh Baruch Hu should help us to explore this wisdom together and to become proficient in these mysteries, so that we can live a life of total connection to Kadosh Baruch Hu every single minute.
The food itself is a nimius activity, by definition you're putting it inside your mouth.
Right.
And the process of breaking it down is condensing it back
to its essence, to its source.